Coming up on Bridge City News. Thanks to Ottawa's $252 million aid package, farmers will be receiving some much-needed help during the COVID-19 pandemic. The province announces that 2 more Albertans have died from the coronavirus. And the coronavirus has hit long-term facilities hard. We speak with the head of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees to hear if the province is doing enough.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The federal government announced $252 million in support for Canada's agriculture industry. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that the aid package includes everything from providing protective equipment for workers in food processing plants to money for beef and pork producers who cannot sell their animals. $50 million will also go into purchasing food that will be sent to food banks, food that would otherwise spoil.
Today, we're announcing more than $77 million to support food processors during this crisis. This is money that they can use to purchase personal protective equipment for workers, adapt to health protocols, and support other social distancing measures. It will also help expand or adapt our processing capacity to increase the amount of Canadian products we make domestically. To help cattle and hog producers, we will launch a $125 million National Agri-Recovery Initiative. Farms and processing plants are raising more animals than the system can process into things like steak and bacon because of COVID-19. For many farmers, this crisis means that they have to keep animals for longer periods of time, and that can be expensive.
Trudeau said more money will flow into the agri-sector if it's needed. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder spoke about the aid package for our farming communities and said it's not nearly enough.
The fact that the Trudeau government is giving our ag sector $250 million is nothing. It's nothing. It's crumbs. It's nonsense. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture requested $2.6 billion. Today, what the government announced is only 1/10 of that. And so I guess my question is then, why isn't the Prime Minister taking this more seriously? Why is he not caring for the daily necessities of every single Canadian across this country? I mean, we're talking about food supply. If we don't have farmers producing the food that we need, and then if that food doesn't land on grocery store shelves, we're in a place of significant detriment as a country.
The Canadian Federation of Agriculture released a statement saying the government funding falls woefully short in addressing the needs of farmers who have lost so much during the pandemic. CFA is urging the feds to open an emergency funds account for farmers, citing a number of losses the industry has already faced.
There are increased costs associated with purchasing the necessary PPE for our workers. Increased costs by being forced to keep livestock for an extended period of time due to reductions in processing capacity. Canadian farmers are feeling increasingly stressed. In fact, right now, some farmers are so worried about the mounting challenges, they are strongly considering halting their farming operations altogether.
Ottawa's announcement also comes in response to concerns about food security in Canada and the health of vulnerable food sector workers.
I read about it and I realized it's probably for the big farmers and the small farmers are going to lose out. I think a lot of it's going to go to the producers and processing plants as well. We'll see the effects for ourselves in the fall when we have to sell our calves, and they're going to go for rock bottom prices and we won't be able to make our payments. I don't expect anything really. We do depend on God first. So yeah, if we can't make our payments, I don't know what's going to happen, but we can't stop.
The government is also adding $125 million to the Agri-Recovery Fund, a program aimed at helping farmers during disasters. As the provinces begin easing COVID-19 restrictions, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau needs a better plan to support Canadians. Scheer says federal benefit programs may become a hindrance to resuming economic activity.
The Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Student Benefit both prevent you from earning more than $1,000 a month. So as businesses start to slowly reopen and have shifts to fill, their employees are being forced to turn them down or risk losing their benefits. As the C.D. Howe Institute said, CERB helped cushion COVID-19's impact but it now threatens to impede the recovery.
A new poll suggests the level of fear is dropping among respondents who believe that they or someone they may know will contract COVID-19. The number of Canadians who admit they did not comply with at least one public health measure rose from 27 to 35%. Still, the poll conducted by Léger says most people are happy with the pace their province is moving to slowly lift pandemic restrictions. Alberta's health authority has appointed a long-term care operator to take over a seniors facility hit hard by COVID-19 outbreaks in Calgary. Alberta Health Services says it hired Aged Care Health to oversee Millrise Seniors Village. The company's CEO says the decision was made in the interest of health and safety of both residents and staff. The Millrise Seniors Village has 25 confirmed COVID-19 cases, including 12 infected staff members and 4 deaths. The president of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says with COVID-19 being rampant in long-term care facilities, more needs to be done. Guy Smith says mandatory testing at these facilities is vital.
The fact that it's now mandatory for staff and residents is good, and I do believe that staff have been redeployed from Alberta Health Services, for example, to help do that. It's certainly, if you can catch it, if you can identify it before it has an effect, obviously prevention is much better than trying to find a cure, of which at the moment there isn't one.
Catch the full interview with the AUPE's Guy Smith and BCN's Paul Arthur coming up after Business News. A collaborative of $4.5 million is going into purchasing new equipment to detect for COVID-19. The province says the funding will improve Alberta's response to the virus. The money includes $1.7 million donation by Calgary Health Trust, with the AHS and the Government of Alberta making up the difference. Minister of Health Tyler Shandro says with the new testing technology, Albertans have another way to help flatten the curve and protect those who are most vulnerable. There were 57 new cases of COVID-19 in Alberta and 2 more deaths. Government officials said of the 5,893 cases of the virus, 3,219 people have now recovered. Our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, says the province is getting help to deal with the outbreak in long-term care facilities.
As of today, there are now 622 COVID-19 outbreak cases in continuing care facilities across the province. I would also like to confirm that Alberta Health Services has retained Aged Care to oversee administration of Millrise Seniors Village in southwest Calgary. This change in administration is a result of challenges in staffing levels at the facility over the past few weeks, as well as concerns over how the facility has managed outbreak protocols during a COVID-19 outbreak at the site. AHS will support the site's day-to-day operations in collaboration with Aged Care and will continue to support staffing as this transition occurs over the coming days.
Officials say a recent boil water advisory brought in during flooding in Fort McMurray could remain in effect until September. City officials say the plant is safe, but the river water went the wrong way down an overflow pipe and mixed with the city's drinking water. They say all 375 kilometers of pipes will have to be cleaned with safe levels of chlorine before the advisory can be lifted. Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo Mayor Don Scott estimates the flooding caused more than $100 million in damage. The federal government announced an immediate ban on all military-grade assault-style weapons in Canada. This means that Canadian gun owners cannot sell, import, or transport these weapons. The federal gun ban has garnered reaction from the Lethbridge community as well. Some for the ban and some against it. MICAH QUINN has the story.
Alan Friesen is the president of the Lethbridge Fish and Game Association and says this new ban hurts gun owners who legally purchase firearms.
Very disturbing, very concerning for those firearms property that let legal owners in Canada that, following all the laws of Canada, bought property, and now the government of Canada says we're taking that property away from you. That's a big concern, and it should concern everybody, not just firearm owners. This is a big deal to take property away from people who purchased it, who bought it, who put their hard-earned money down to get property that they were going to use for their sport.
Maria Fitzpatrick is the former Lethbridge East MLA and says she agrees with the ban because of a past experience with domestic violence.
I was a victim of domestic violence, and I've had a gun to the back of my head. And I don't believe anybody should have a gun to the back of their head. And I've had people say to me, yes, but they don't need a gun if they want to do something, and that's right. My ex-husband could have killed me with his bare hands. He was certainly athletic. He was strong enough to do that. He could have used a kitchen knife. The bottom line is, if you have a gun, you've got another option to take somebody's life.
The Prime Minister has announced a 2-year amnesty period for current gun owners to adhere with the law. For Bridge City News, I'm MICAH QUINN.
Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says as a firearm owner herself, she feels that PM Justin Trudeau's firearm ban is wrong and that confiscation of guns must be stopped.
With the stroke of a pen, essentially made me and hundreds of thousands of other Canadians criminals by saying that even though we jumped through all of the hoops, the super strict vetting, all of the stringent laws that Canada have to legally own this property and use it under very strict circumstances, very tight storage guidelines, that is wrong. There is no data. There is no data that shows that what he did today is going to have any impact whatsoever on firearms violence in Canada, because we know that the vast overwhelming amount of guns that are used in firearms related crime in Canada are illegally smuggled from the United States.
Trudeau says the government was on the verge of bringing in stricter gun control legislation in March, but froze plans when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Lethbridge police have launched an investigation into yesterday's stormtrooper incident at Cocoa Vanilla Galactic Cantina. At around 11 a.m., police received 2 911 calls about a person wearing a stormtrooper costume carrying a firearm. When police arrived, they say the person in the outfit dropped the weapon but did not initially comply about getting down on the ground. The weapon was confirmed to be a fake and the female subject was not charged. She did, however, receive a minor injury. Police Chief Scott Woods has directed a service investigation to see whether officers acted appropriately. The LPS will have more to say on the matter once the investigation is complete. 4 people in Lethbridge have been charged with drug offenses following a bust by members of the police crime suppression team at a Westside home on April 30th. Police seized methamphetamine, fentanyl, and cocaine worth around $7,500. In addition, 2 kids, aged 12 and 15, were also found inside of the home, along with brass knuckles and around $800 in cash. 3 men, ages 45, 38, and 28, along with an 18-year-old woman, face a wide range of drug charges. They will appear in court on July 24th. Now, they cannot be named to protect the identity of the children. The Gujarati Society of Lethbridge wanted to honor the Lethbridge Police Service for being on the front lines. And a sweet treat made the LPS melt with gratitude today.
We can't thank enough for the ice cream being donated today. It's always great to be recognized. It's especially important to, during this current crisis, the importance of the work that the frontline people are doing. And that just doesn't include police. That's the fire, that's the frontline people working at the hospitals, the grocery stores, all that. So to be recognized and have our staff and officers be treated with some ice cream today is fantastic.
If your car battery has died and you've been in need of roadside assistance, you're not alone. The Alberta Motor Association says they've noticed a 50% increase of dead batteries from vehicles which have been sitting for a while.
I just go for a little rip once a week. That's really all it takes too. So think about this anytime you do take your vehicle out. Try to avoid those short, 5-10 minute trips, because every time you start your vehicle, it takes about 15 minutes to charge that battery back up to where it was before you started it. So we recommend at least a 20-minute drive. If you do have to take it out, if you do go somewhere, maybe drive around the neighborhood, just something so that you can get at least that 20 minutes of charge back into your vehicle.
Now, according to the AMA, requests for other roadside services have dropped 30%. Mother's Day is coming up this Sunday. In order to properly prepare for the event, one church in Lethbridge is providing free kids' activity packs to take home. City Light Church says it is something to keep the kids busy while doing something nice for mom.
Mother's Day is a very special holiday. I think moms give a ton of effort into their kids each and every day, and they just look after them, and they have such huge hearts. So I think it's really special to be able to give back to them in any way, and it's kind of cool for the kids to be able to be a huge part of that. Could do the craft with their mom, or their dads could even step in and spend a little bit of time with their children, and it could be a surprise for the mom. So it's a little bit special to bring in a home aspect of it instead of bringing it in from school.
The booklets are available to be picked up at City Light Church, which is located at 4101 20th Avenue South. Today is Giving Tuesday. It's a new global day of giving in response to COVID-19. The province is allocating $2 million to match donations made by Albertans to designated charities. Those nonprofit groups include the United Way and community foundations across Alberta. Government officials say COVID-19 pandemic response programs play a supporting role to flow donations through to local community-based nonprofits and charitable groups that deliver services to vulnerable Albertans. Liberal MP and former Cabinet Minister Jim Carr is returning to hospital for a stem cell transplant. He says treatment for his blood cancer has been delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Carr was diagnosed after experiencing flu-like symptoms during the federal election campaign last fall. The Winnipeg MP was one of a handful of Liberals who were re-elected on the Prairie provinces. Scientists with the federal government say much of Western Canada could see a wildfire season that is well above national averages this year. Natural Resources Canada has released projections showing an elevated fire risk beginning next month. Parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba could see a higher threat of wildfires into September. The head of the Wildland Fire Information Systems says the West could see a fairly active fire season. The world's largest hornet, a 2-inch killer dubbed the murder hornet with an appetite for honeybees, has been found in Washington state. Entomologists are currently making plans to wipe it out.
So all of the hullabaloo right now is in response to us finding, maybe established for the first time in North America, the Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia.
They're one of the largest hornets that we have on the planet. And so that's what makes them so unusual and makes them so striking to people. They do not occur here in North America. They're native to the Pacific Rim of Southeast Asia. Where they do occur, they're voracious predators of honeybees.
Our biggest fear is that it will actually impact small beekeepers and maybe drive them out of business and raise costs for larger beekeepers. It's just something we don't want to see happen.
A 5-year-old boy was pulled over while driving on an interstate in Utah on Monday. A state trooper says the boy went on quite the joyride.
So I followed the car that was swerving, and I was actually thinking it might be a medical issue, if not an impaired driver, but it seemed a little worse than a normal impaired driver. So I turned my overhead lights on and got no reaction from the car. I hit my siren, and the car did immediately pull over to the left. I approached the vehicle, and I was expecting to find somebody who needed an ambulance or paramedics, and it was pretty clear when the window came down that it was a young, very underage driver.
What I would like to know is, how were his feet able to reach the pedals? We had a mixture of sun and cloud today and fairly mild. It was a nice day for a drive, and the warm temperatures will continue. Full weather details are coming up. We had lots of sunshine again today and hit double-digit temperatures once again. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near 4. More cloud should move in tomorrow, and we should see a high near 17. A mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 16 on Thursday. Friday, mainly sunny with a high near 18 degrees. A nice weekend is shaping up. Sunny and 14 for Saturday. Sun mixed with cloud and a high of 15 degrees on Sunday. Monday, a couple of degrees warmer with a high near 17. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 17 degrees and an average low of 3. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1992 at 30 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -6 in 1967. Sunrise was at 6:01, sunset at 8:55. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, Victoria will be cloudy with a chance of showers and a high of 16. Expect rain and 15 for Vancouver. Increasing clouds and 17 for Calgary. Sunshine and 20 is on tap for Edmonton tomorrow. Sunny and 18 for Regina. Mainly sunny and 19 for Saskatoon. A clear sky and 12 is on tap for Winnipeg on Wednesday. Expect sun mixed with cloud and a high of 12 for Toronto. Mainly cloudy and 14 for Ottawa. Just a few clouds and 14 as well for Montreal tomorrow. In the Atlantic provinces, expect lots of sunshine and 14 for Fredericton, New Brunswick. Just a few clouds and 12 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. A mixture of sun and cloud and 8 degrees for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain with a high near 5 degrees for tomorrow.
Today's weather highlights are brought to you by Dan's LA Carpet Cleaning. Residential and commercial carpet and furniture cleaning since 1989.
CP Railway moved 2.8 million tons of grain and grain products last month. That's the most in the company's 139-year history. The Calgary-based railway says it foresees strong grain shipments for the remainder of this crop year, thanks in part to the spring opening of a port in Thunder Bay, Ontario. 21.4 million tons of grain this year, with record shipments in January, March, and the first quarter, which is a 6% increase over the same point last year and 8% more than the previous 3-year average. Canada's trade deficit widened to $1.4 billion in March, and Stats Canada warns it's going to be worse in April. The trade deficit was up 56% from a revised $894 million in February. It still beat economists' expectations of a $2 billion deficit. The federal agency said both imports and exports came to a halt in most major economies to try and contain the spread of COVID-19. It notes that with a full month of physical distancing policies in place, merchandise trade values are expected to decrease more severely. MEG Energy is cutting its capital spending guidance for a second time and reducing costs due to plummeting oil prices. The Calgary-based company now expects its capital spending to total $150 million. That is down by $50 million from its estimate in March and $100 million from last year. MEG is also reducing non-energy operating costs along with administrative expenses by a total of $30 million. The cuts were announced as the company reported a first quarter loss of $284 million compared with a loss of $48 million in the same quarter last year. George Weston is reporting a $582 million profit in the first quarter. That is up from a $488 million loss a year ago when it took a large one-time charge related to its trust unit. Revenue was up 5% to $12.3 billion, while adjusted earnings were up nearly 19% to $239 million. George Weston attributed the increase to its ownership interest in Loblaw. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 66 points on the day to finish at 14,811. The Dow was up 133 points to 23,883. The S&P 500 was up 25 points to 2868, and the Nasdaq was up 98 points to 8809. Oil was up 4.89 to 25.28 per barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to 2.08. Gold was up 94 cents to 17.0687 an ounce, and silver was up 3 cents to 14.99 an ounce. Wheat is at $240 per metric ton, barley's at $233, canola's at $464, and corn is at $230 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.66 to $88.90, feeder cattle were up 53 cents to $119.70, and lean hogs were down $1.58 to $67.40. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 71.18 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the federal government announced $252 million in support for Canada's agri-industry. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that the aid package includes everything from providing protective equipment for workers in food processing plants to money for beef and pork producers who cannot sell their animals. $50 million will go into purchasing food that can be sent to food banks. Is the province doing enough when it comes to protecting workers in meat processing and long-term care facilities during the COVID-19 pandemic? Up next, BCN's Paul Arthur hears the thoughts of the president of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, Guy Smith. That Q&A is coming right up.
Canadians have been both saddened and angered by the number of deaths that have occurred in our nation's long-term care facility during this COVID-19 pandemic. Why is it that so many centres are understaffed? What needs to change? Today's guest joins us from Edmonton, Guy Smith, president of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. Guy, first of all, we want to acknowledge that the hard work and sacrifice so many healthcare workers are providing for us as they care for patients with COVID-19, of course, trying to prevent others from catching this virus as well. They're putting in a lot of hard work, right?
Oh, absolutely. We represent most of the workers in the private long-term care and obviously at Alberta Health Services too. And, you know, I like to call them heroes. And sometimes they say to me, oh, Guy, we're not heroes. We're just doing our job. And quite honestly, I think they're heroes because they are on the front lines of this pandemic. They're there because they care and they're working extremely hard and obviously putting themselves at risk as well. So in my mind, they're heroes, but they say they're just doing their job and they're doing a great job.
Yeah, I think we would all agree we need to salute them. Now, we've been hearing a lot about the problem of understaffing at our long-term care facilities and, of course, the multiple deaths occurring in elderly people in some of these centres. The province announced that they would be providing additional funding for the hiring of 1,000 additional full-time staff, and I believe that's also 1,000 students doing their practicums, and I think those are paid practicums this time. So a couple of questions. Have those staff already been hired?
Not as far as I know. I think the announcement was made fairly recently. What we're seeing is this government they're making announcements, but they don't understand sometimes the complexity of actually putting those announcements into action. So as of yet, I'm not sure if those additional staff have been hired, the practicum students, but obviously that's a welcome move. There needs to be some help on the front lines. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The staff were working short before the pandemic, and as you can imagine, the workload and the intensity of that workload has increased. So more hands on deck is necessary, absolutely.
Yeah, where do you find the 1,000 people to, come on staff right away? I guess is a good question too. Now, are these hires just temporary for the duration of the pandemic, or are they going to be kept on afterwards as well? Do you know that?
I don't know that, but it's pretty clear that we need to have more permanent staffing in long-term care regardless. Right now, our members working across the province in long-term care mostly work 2, sometimes 3 jobs, part-time jobs, just to make ends meet and feed their own families. So there needs to be more stability in the long-term care sector. Alberta is a mosaic or a patchwork, if you like, of various private for-profit employers, private not-for-profit employers, and some Alberta Health Services sites as well. So it's a bit of a mess out there. And if nothing else, this pandemic has really highlighted the fact that there needs to be much more coordination, stabilization across the board, because we're supporting the most vulnerable, the elderly, and honestly, they need to get the best treatment possible. And quite honestly, in some of these private long-term care centers, they're paying a lot just to be there.
Well, that's true too. Now, there's so much that goes on in these care centers. I've had my parents in long-term care, for a number of years now, and my mom has since passed on, but my dad is still there. And you see the incredibly hard work that these people put in. Now, can you explain what kind of work health care aides do specifically, and why that is actually, we might say, oh, they're just healthcare aides. Oh, really? I've seen the work they do. Why is it critical to the health of patients?
Well, I think anybody in a long-term care center needs to, feel cared for, supported, loved in some ways, and it's the healthcare aides look after their every need, their daily needs. Making sure that they're clean and fed, that their surroundings are clean and inviting, and also they're there as a hand to hold. They're there for someone to talk to. They're there as a consistent face and someone who is there to support to folks in long-term care. Sometimes they don't even get to see their own family, or they may not have family to see. Sometimes our members, particularly the healthcare aides, are there as part of their family, and that's a really important part. It's the physical needs, but it's also the emotional needs that these healthcare aides play a major role in. But as you mentioned, they're running from resident to resident. They don't have the time that they need or want to be able to do their job effectively and properly.
Absolutely. No, they are clearly understaffed. That's quite evident if you have a parent in one of these situations there. And again, sometimes it's, you're dealing with different kinds of situations. Some people can care for themselves relatively well. Other people have to, have their teeth brushed. They have to be shaved, combed, fingernails clipped. And there's incontinence. There's other issues there. You have to physically lift people sometimes. It's a lot of hard work. And again, they're just running big time. So I know there definitely needs to be more people hired. Do you know any idea what the proper ratio of healthcare aides per number of patients should be? I'm not sure what the actual target is right now, and how much that needs to go increased.
Well, there are no cookie cutter approaches to this. Obviously, there's different patients and residents with different needs, and obviously the more high acuity needs lower ratios of patients to staff. And this is one of the things that we've been calling for as a union for years: standardized ratios, staffing ratios, and rules for every employer to follow when making sure that they're hiring enough staff. There needs to be standardization and a certain.
So sorry to interrupt there, Guy. So you're saying that there is no standard? The government does not have a standard for that across the board?
There's no set standard. There are certain requirements for hours, if you like, hours of of care, if you like, that each resident should be provided with by either a healthcare aide or a licensed practical nurse. And the thing is that a lot of these sites don't have enough staff to manage the number of hours of care required. So that needs to be standardized. That needs to be written into law to ensure that the companies that run long-term care centers hire enough staff to make sure that the residents get the hours of service that they need. And certainly those hours of service are less than you'd find in the public long-term care centers. And that's just because, unfortunately, these long-term care centers are run for profit a lot of times. So staffing is one of those areas where they cut back. And as I was saying, we've seen an increase in the profiteering and the privatization of long-term care, particularly over the last 10 years. It's really ballooned quite dramatically over the last 10 years. And we go in as a union and organize those workers. They see the need to be in part of a union, and that's when we really see the struggles of trying to make sure that our staff, our members are protected and that they get what they need. But quite honestly, it's been a struggle, and we've had a lot of labor disputes in long-term care over the last few years because of that.
Yeah, we've seen that. And I would agree that I think there needs to be some sort of a standardized, minimum that we need to be aiming for here across the board. Now, the government has also granted a $2 per hour wage top-up here for healthcare aides during this pandemic time. So has that kicked in already as well?
Well, when the announcement was made for the $2 top-up for healthcare aides, it was very unclear as to how it would be applied. Which healthcare aides get it, in which facilities. And we're hearing now that it's not going to some facilities and it's going to others. We're also hearing from our members that some of the facilities it should be going to, their employers saying, well, no, you only get it if there's a COVID outbreak. Well, nobody knows what the rules are, and it's been really frustrating and confusing. But the other thing is, it shouldn't just be for healthcare aides. There's licensed practical nurses, and there's also support staff, cleaners and food service workers, maintenance workers, who are all part of that team that are supporting the vulnerable Albertans in long-term care. So it seems to have been announced without any sort of thought or analysis of how it would be applied. And that's another thing we've been pushing for, is the standardization of pay during this pandemic, at least, to make sure that there's a level playing field, because the rates of pay differ immensely amongst various long-term care centers, and so we believe it should be standardized like they did in British Columbia. What they did is they applied the same wage rate that you'd find in the public sector to all the private long-term care centers, and it's really helped stabilize their ability to provide the services, critical services that are absolutely necessary right now.
So they're saying that during the pandemic time in BC, they're saying, you know what, we're going to standardize this just to make sure they get the proper care in each center. So, okay, I can see that. Now,
Yes.
Now LPNs, licensed practical nurses, can you describe the work that they provide in long-term care facilities? And is there also an understaffing issue there?
Yes, there's also an understaffing issue there, because the licensed practical nurses really are the clinical experts on the floor, able to assess a patient, able to deal with their medical needs, whether they're urgent or ongoing. Obviously, the healthcare aides play a role in that, and in terms of monitoring the residents and patients they're looking for, and maybe alerting a licensed practical nurse that somebody needs immediate help, or able to provide that analysis for them. But the licensed practical nurse is the clinical expert who would provide medical services and clinical services.
Okay. Another change has been the requirement for long-term care facility workers to only work at one site. And that's a challenge because so many are part-time, as you pointed out earlier. Yeah. They're working at several locations to make ends meet. So how is that turning out so far?
Well, it's really, the process is still in process. It's not complete yet, even though that determination was made by the Chief Medical Officer of Health quite a while ago. There was an attempt through a ministerial order from the Labour Minister to put it in place with a deadline of a week ago, I think it was, to have it in place. There were so many problems with that they actually asked the unions to get involved to help them come up with a better plan, and that's been worked on, and a new ministerial order has been issued, but we still don't know when that is to take effect. And really, that needs to happen sooner than later. It's certainly a good move. We certainly support it. But as I was saying, when you've got workers working to with 2 or 3 different employers, deciding which one to spend the pandemic time with is very challenging. And obviously, they're going to look at where they're going to be treated best, where the best pay and benefits are. I mean, who can blame them? They've got families to feed as well. And that's one of the reasons we say you need to standardize it across the board so that workers aren't shopping around to figure out where they can provide their services during this pandemic. So the new ministerial order is a lot stronger. It's a lot clearer. And that's because the unions were involved in giving some advice on how it should come about. But as of yet, it has yet to take full force.
Right, yeah, I mean, something like that, I mean, just, practically thinking that through, it cannot happen just overnight. That's a lot of sorting out, I mean, where do people live and how long does it take to get there, especially if they have to do transit in this pandemic time as well. There's all kinds of factors involved here, but hopefully there will be more full-time staff. And I mean, of course, there's a need for part-time as well, but and at one facility, I think that would be better basically for everybody, residents and patients and staff, right? So hopefully that continues down the line. Now, what about the new mandatory testing at long-term care facilities for all residents and staff? I mean, I guess I'm guessing that maybe should have been in place sooner. Is that what you're thinking, or?
Yeah, it should be no surprise that really the front line of the pandemic and where it's hitting the hardest is the most vulnerable and the elderly who are in these long-term care centers. And we've certainly seen that across the country and even here in Alberta. I think having that mandatory testing early on may have helped prevent some of those, outbreaks of COVID in some of the long-term care centers, and certainly maybe have helped prevent some deaths. The fact that it's now mandatory for staff and residents is good, and I do believe that staff have been redeployed from Alberta Health Services, for example, to help do that. It's certainly, if you can catch it, if you can identify it before it has an effect, obviously prevention is much better than trying to find a cure, of which at the moment there isn't one.
Mm-hmm. Another issue that's come up is the importance of having the proper equipment to keep our frontline workers safe. There have been complaints recently about a shipment of face masks that weren't fitting properly and apparently causing some allergic reactions, interestingly enough. Have you heard back from workers as to whether that issue has been solved yet?
Well, we're constantly monitoring the personal protective equipment that our members have access to and how to use it properly. And that was one of the first things we did. Obviously, health and safety of workers and obviously patients and residents is the #1 priority. So we were in fairly lengthy discussions with Alberta Health Services about the protocol around using proper protective equipment and when to use it. And we were told that the supply chain was healthy, that there was enough supplies to see us through this. So we were a little surprised when a new supplier provided masks, surgical masks, that were having a negative impact on workers. And I believe that's been addressed now. Obviously I have staff that are supporting our members in that. I haven't heard any new problems with that, but when it comes to long-term care, we are hearing from staff that sometimes they don't have quick access to protective equipment. And I think that's, you have to use it prudently, right? But it has to be there when you need it. And I think, there's an important balance there, responsibility on both the employer to supply the equipment and the responsibility of the worker to make their assessment of when to use it appropriately.
Okay. I'm out of time here, Guy, but I'm guessing as far as your advice to viewers, if we want to see better staffing for our parents, grandparents, we need to be in contact with our MLAs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This issue obviously is front and center right now, is making sure Albertans are safe and healthy. But the whole issue of long-term care in Alberta will be an ongoing issue long beyond this. And I think, if nothing else, this tragic situation that we're dealing with has shone a light on something that we've been saying has been a problem for a very long time.
Guy, thank you so much for making time for us here today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care.
U.S. President Donald Trump made a bold prediction that the coronavirus vaccine will be developed by the end of the year, and vows the plague will pass as well. To talk more about it is U.S. correspondent and our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, will the vaccine come from a lab in the United States, maybe here in Canada? How about Israel?
Wherever it comes from, it will be very much welcomed all over the world. We've even heard terrorists and anti-Israel leaders say, even if the vaccine ends up coming from Israel, we'll be allowed to use it, although they boycott all the other goods coming from Israel and the BDS movement. I think all eyes are on the clock more than anything else, and even though there is this push to get the vaccine now, there is a united front on who's going to have the vaccine, but yet there's also a competitive front as to who's going to, which lab privately will be the lab to come up with the vaccine that everybody is waiting with bated breath. I think so many lives depend on this. Society depends on this. People can come out, live normal lives knowing that the vaccine exists. Now, whether or not people will go for it is another conversation to be had, but all eyes are on that clock.
Could you imagine the money that some of these pharmaceutical companies are going to make? Unbelievable. And there are reports that China hid the severity of the coronavirus to hoard supplies. Tell me more about that.
Right. So U.S. leaders, more specifically Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, accused China of hiding the news about the coronavirus and not sharing it with the WHO or the rest of the world in a timely fashion, and that they hid that news for multiple reasons, and one of which being that they wanted to give themselves time to accumulate masks and gloves and all the other PPE equipment so that they could again have the market edge in selling that equipment just like they are currently. This is the lowest of the low, and this is what China's been doing. You have to remind yourself that before Donald Trump became president, I mean, if you look at interviews that he had in the 80s, he would always talk about the fact that other countries take advantage of the United States and the West in general with regards to trade, with regards to import, export. And if you fast forward to the 90s, and it was Bill Clinton who prided himself on getting cheap goods and cheap labor and getting all of our manufacturing moved overseas to China. And now we're paying for it. We're absolutely paying for it. And not just in the sense that this virus, which is obviously the worst culmination of paying for it, quote unquote, but it's that all of our essential supplies come from China, from essential to non-essential. We rely on them instead of the other way around.
Hostile states are attempting to hack British universities and scientific facilities to steal research related to COVID-19. Lisa, that includes vaccine development.
Right. So this is going back to the competitive side of knowing about COVID-19 and more specifically about the development of a vaccine. British experts are saying that attempts have been made into universities and research centers who have an edge on getting a vaccine out, but they have yet to succeed. Look, right now, cyber hacking is at an all-time high. And myself, I was hacked just a week ago. They know we're sitting around. They know that people will have a hard time getting in touch with banks and other facilities to get set up again, to have them to get their email addresses acquired again. So they know that guards are down, vulnerabilities are high, and they are going to seize upon that. Now again, this information or intellectual property is always something that is very much cherished and something that hackers go for, particularly the main three, China, Russia, and Iran. They've always been copycat stealers of information, intellectual property. They copy drone technology, they copy military technology, and of course they will try to copy vaccine technology right now. So no surprise here.
In various provinces across Canada, we're easing some of the restrictions when it comes to the COVID-19 lockdown, Lisa. Europe is also preparing to ease lockdowns as Italy, Spain, and France saw new lows when it came to COVID-related deaths.
Yes, so again, all eyes being on Europe because they are leading, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the curve. They're ahead of where other countries may be or other continents may be right now. We're looking at Italy, we're looking at France, we're looking at Spain, and Italy, who had the exponential rise in the number of casualties, has started to flatten the curve, so to speak. They have had multiple days of lower and lower number of fatalities, and therefore they are going to allow people to go to parks and to start having social distancing visits with extended family members, etc. This couldn't come at a better time. It's May now, and the weather is getting nicer in all parts of the world, and people are looking forward to getting out, getting fresh air. We talked about how you and I, we talk about the other side effects of COVID-19. So, the economic side effects, the social and psychological side effects of quarantining and not being able to go out, not being able to visit elderly family, young family, etc. So this is definitely going to be a good thing as long as we can keep those numbers low.
What's really interesting about France, however, they've extended the coronavirus health emergency and will quarantine all travelers for 14 days.
This includes people who are French citizens, by the way. So if you leave France, you want to come back in, and the rationale behind this makes sense, sort of. It's that they are quarantining their society, and if you leave or want to re-enter, then you need to re-quarantine so that you make sure that you're not bringing the virus from anywhere else back into the country, whether you're visiting or whether you are a native there. France has had an interesting fluctuation in numbers, and I think when they saw their numbers rise again, they had to clamp down and make sure that people aren't jogging, they're not going out to the parks, they're not going out to the sightseeing areas, and now this 14 days of quarantine for anybody who's coming in or out.
Meanwhile, in South America, Brazil has seen coronavirus cases rise about 100,000.
Yeah, for some reason, well, it makes sense because it's a high number, but 100,000 is the mark. So countries that are reporting 100,000 cases suddenly, rethink their approach and have to, really crack down on their quarantining and social distancing to prevent the virus from spreading any further. Brazil had that exact situation. It hit them a bit later than other places, so they're experiencing the curve on the way up. Hopefully, they will be able to flatten it very soon. But in the meantime, they're cracking down. They're trying to make sure that this number doesn't grow any further than the 105,000 is the latest number I heard.
Now, still in South America, Venezuela is accusing Colombia of attempting a terrorist sea invasion. Venezuela claims it foiled an attack backed by the United States.
Yeah, it sounds like a scene from Fauda, if you've seen that series on Netflix. It's about the Gaza and Palestinian and Israeli ongoing war. But this is a similar accusation that they make, that Venezuela accuses Colombia in cahoots with the United States of staging an attack by sea on Venezuela. And if you recall, Venezuela and Colombia, they cut diplomatic ties just last year when Colombia was calling out Venezuela and Maduro in particular for the crackdowns on protesters, for the human rights abuses there. And Colombia is laughing this off and saying this is nonsense. Nothing of the sort occurred.
Now, the last time we spoke, the question about whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was alive or dead was up in the air. That question may have been answered as Kim was seen recently at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Oh, and North and South Korean troops were exchanging fire along their border.
Here we go again, North Korea back in the headlines, and for a while there they weren't in the headlines, then they were competing with the COVID-19 headlines, and now, okay, he's back. So, it's not strange for Kim Jong-un to kind of disappear from, the public eye. He's done this before, but what was strange is that he missed his grandfather's the commemoration of his birthday. His grandfather has passed away. Obviously, he has great respect and reverence for his family, for his grandfather, somebody he looked up to. So the fact that he was missing, that's what gave birth to so many of these rumors. And then subsequently, he was missing from some other important state-level events, which again furthered the conspiracy or the rumor that he is ill or recovering or missing or dead. And now he's made his appearance again, and all is well. On the other hand, we have North Korea back in the news because they exchanged fire with South Korea. They launched the missile against a guard tower there. And Secretary of State Pompeo here in the United States dismissed this whole thing and said, we think it's pretty much accidental. It didn't escalate. There were no fatalities, and we're thinking it's just something that happened by accident.
You know, and it turns out Kim Jong-un did not even have heart surgery as first reported. Like, what is that all about? How do you say it was botched heart surgery? The guy's dead. Let's move on. You know, news agencies were reporting, and it's like, no, he didn't even have heart surgery. How can you get that so wrong?
Right. So you have local news sources on both sides very confident about this. The news that he was dead, let alone about the heart surgery, the news that he was dead came from very confident Hong Kong news sources. And the, again, alleged story that he didn't even have the heart surgery came from South Korea. So, you know, I think countries in the region, what's their agenda? What are they trying to push? Who's telling the truth? Who's not? You know, we'll never know whether or not he had heart surgery or not. We'll have to obviously keep an eye on his health, but we know we don't get any answers or any much of the truth from North Korea. The regime tries to keep everything very, very secret. But as I said on a radio show, you know, recently, it's amazing what we do know about Kim Jong-un, the fact that he likes Twinkies or that he travels with a gold toilet. But and then the things that we don't know about him: is he alive? You know, did he have heart surgery? So the regime is very protective of him. They're very selective of what gets out, how they tell their stories, and it smells very much like an authoritarian regime, which they are. So there you
Lisa,
have it.
let's talk a bit more about COVID-19 once again in the pandemic. We're seeing here in Canada so many people recovering, which is wonderful to see, of the coronavirus. But let's talk about some of the more hard-hit areas in the United States where there's a lot of high density, including New York State and where you are in California. Are you seeing a lot of people recovering from the virus?
You know, there's a lot of people who, in the days that will follow, in the months to follow, if they can get themselves an antibody test, we're going to probably hear about a lot of people who had a very mild case of coronavirus and were able to recover or not show symptoms, etc. What does manifest, and it is visible to the eye, is the people who are affected, are going to the hospital, that require ventilators, that are unfortunately even passing away. New York City was hard hit. I mean, that became the epicenter of this entire virus, and that is because, you know, they live in such close quarters. I lived in New York City for many years, and I'll tell you, it's impossible to walk down the street and not, you know, be in somebody's face. You're rubbing elbows and you're breathing on each other. The work conditions are the same with cubicles and getting in and out of buildings and the elevators and the handles and the subways and the buses, public transportation, et cetera. So I think, you know, this virus spread very quickly in the first weeks of March and the final weeks of February before anybody even knew that it was spreading. So, you know, in high density areas like New York City and Los Angeles, but more so New York City, this virus was spreading before people knew it, and unfortunately became too late. I personally know people who have been affected. I know, you know, people who have family members who have unfortunately passed away. But because of these stories, people are being extra vigilant. While, as you know, there's also another narrative here in the United States with people protesting to open up businesses, to not, you know, throw out the baby with the bathwater, and to punish the states that are actually doing well and whose numbers don't really warrant a complete shutdown of the economy. So, you know, we're going to see a gradual opening up. We heard Donald Trump say that there is going to be, you know, a very logical path forward. Governors have to involved and decide. And what we do hope, we're not guaranteed this, but what we do hope is that governors and local officials are able to put their partisan politics aside and to decide what's best for the people of each state rather than what's best for the election, what's best for federal funding, what's best for, you know, making Donald Trump look good or bad, et cetera. So we are all in this together, and if there were ever a unifying time or period in my life or anybody's life right now, I think this is it. And let's really lean on that and not let partisan politics divide us or hide the truth from us in any way.
How about your frontline workers and your first responders? How strained is your system right now, especially the healthcare system in the United States?
You know, it depends on the area. You have places where, you know, my sister, for example, is a medical resident at a hospital in California, and I spoke to her last night. She got her roster for this morning. 5 out of 7 of her patients were COVID positive. So it's it's there. It's definitely there. Now she actually explained to me how they had patients with such varying symptoms that it was very hard to detect. One patient she thought was a complete GI case, and they called in a GI to do some tests, and he said, "Test this guy for COVID. This is not a classic GI case." And sure enough, he was COVID positive. Now imagine all the healthcare workers, the nurses, the assistants, et cetera, that worked on this guy and did his labs and did his vitals before knowing that he was COVID positive. In New York, it's the opposite. You don't have that luxury of waiting to test. You have to test. I have a friend who's a physician in the ER in New York City, and she says they basically don't even triage certain patients for in such a bad case, whether it's their age or the advancement of the virus or underlying conditions. They have lung conditions or heart condition, then they won't even get the treatment. They'll kind of defer that treatment to someone who's younger and actually has a chance. Very sad, and very real, these cases, yeah.
U.S. correspondent Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining me from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.